Hi, my name is Sudrako Mwakalo Akokwe, and I'm the co-founder and the CEO of the Eastern Nigeria Film and Arts Initiative, the consortium for the Eastern Nigeria International Film Festival. I am your moderator for today's discussion, welcoming you to exploring African identity through arts, culture, and storytelling. So we'll be diving into what it means to celebrate and reshape African identity through storytelling and all of creative expression. And again, this conversation is all about honoring our past while opening up new possibilities for African storytellers' future. And of course, when I say African storytellers, I mean every creative, whether you're a musician, an artist, filmmaker, fashion designer, you are welcome to the fold. So I would like you to get your seats, get your coffee, get your popcorn, whatever you need, and get ready for an inspiring dialogue on how tradition and innovation can coexist to celebrate, preserve, and redefine African identity for generations to come. So with me and the panel, I have three powerful people that are doing great things in the world of creativity. And there's something about today's conversation is that these three people are not just pioneers in the industry, but they are so dear to me. They are friends, and I've followed their journey over the years. And I tell you, there is a lot to glean from their wealth of experience. So let me start by introducing Yvonne Chioma Mbanefo, a cultural authenticity consultant and story-driven strategist who helps organizations bridge cultural gaps through the power of storytelling. Drawing from her deep knowledge of African and Black diaspora literature, proverbs, and cultural wisdom, she pioneers innovative approaches to cultural competence and inclusive leadership. Through her Story Bridge methodology, Yvonne transforms how global leaders and organizations approach diversity, equity, and inclusion, leveraging literary and cultural narratives to foster deeper understanding and create lasting organizational change. As the founder of Cultural Creator, she works with international corporations, educational institutions, and global leaders, combining centuries-old wisdom with contemporary business challenges. Yvonne is also the co-founder of the International Igbo Conference, which provides a forum for academia and the community to exchange information about Igbo studies. Her expertise in cultural authenticity is further demonstrated through her role as a cultural consultant and the executive producer for the award-winning historical film, Equinor Stories, offering fresh perspectives on identity, leadership, and cultural authenticity in our increasingly interconnected world. So, Yvonne, you are welcome.
Thank you very much.
I would like to introduce the next panelist, Dr. Gillian Richards Graves. Dr. Gillian is the Associate Professor of Anthropology at Coastal Carolina University. She specializes in African diaspora studies, exploring cultural ties between Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States of America. She authored Rediasporization and several children's books, including Eclectic Hair with Granny and Me, and The Clocking Snake. In 2022, she received a Fulbright grant to teach at the Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Nigeria. And Dr. Gillian, welcome to Storylines. And the next panelist is Chief Obiora Mwazota Aguiyi Orifite. Obiora is an accomplished architect and visionary entrepreneur known for transforming Chicago's cultural landscape. As founder and owner of Honor Design Studio, he has built a celebrated portfolio that highlights diverse community connections. His innovative design is deeply rooted in cultural resilience have earned him a place in prominent museums and recognition as one of Chicago's top 50 creatives. Obiora also established the Orange Skin Showroom and Minotti Chicago Monobrand Showroom, both renowned for cutting-edge design. In 2020, he unveiled Opera House, an initiative that reimagines Igbo traditions for modern styles, extending influence within and beyond the Igbo community. His debut book, Nkendiche, Why We Do Not Grow Birds, won the 2021 AIGA 50 Best Book Cover Design Award. Looking to 2025, Obiora plans to launch Ikenga, reimagining a powerful Igbo symbol for a new generation. Opera House, under construction in Anambra State, will serve as a creative platform connecting the diaspora and Black Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to Storylines at NF, and I look forward to us having a fantastic conversation. All right, please let me get this sorted. So I think my first question that I would like everybody to jump into, like I would like each and every one of you to chip into this question. I would like to hear your perspectives on it is, how would each of you define African identity, especially within the context of Eastern Nigeria? And in what ways does your personal or artistic background shape your view of African identity, and how has that evolved through your career? And I think I would like this conversation to start with Yvonne.
Hello, thank you, Ujuako, and for this conversation, making it happen. African identity is quite multi-layered, and it starts with the person's heritage, the person's upbringing, and the experiences they've had throughout their lives. But a major part of it also has to do with the way the person sees themselves, because a person might look African, but they don't see themselves as African. So it's the way they see the world and the way they relate with the world that also brings it all together. But the culture, the history of where one comes from, their heritage, but what happens with them and what happens generations before them is all part of what, brings about that idea of an African heritage. Because there are people who are, who are from maybe in the Black diaspora, who are even more invested in their African roots than people who are African and live in Africa. So that's why, it's always multi-layered when it comes to, African identity. For me personally, I see my experiences, my own history as part of who I am. And that intersectionality also informs, my own African identity as an Igbo woman, as a Nigerian, as a West African woman, as a Black British, because I've spent, I started life, I was born in England. So I've had those, layers. Being born here, went back as a kid. All my growing up period was in Nigeria, which informed who I see as myself. But at the same time, I didn't know how Igbo I was until I left that vicinity and came to England. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I see identity anyway. It's multi-layered.
So when you talked about someone somewhere that may not even be African may actually see himself as African, while the Africans themselves don't want to, do anything, don't want to be African. And that reminds me of a conversation I always have with Obiora. And when he tries to define what it means to, Igbo, there's this question he will always ask you. Like if somebody enters your house, what will the person see? What would the person see that would make the person say, oh, this is an Igbo woman, or this is a South African, or this is a Rwandan, right? So, Obiora, can you define what African identity means to you and how it has shaped your career?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on this panel, and much respect to my fellow panelists and to the festival. Very much needed. Any opportunity for us to narrate and put out into the public arena, information and knowledge that celebrates our concerns. It's always a good day. It's always a good thing. Identity for me, especially when it comes to Africa, I learned something, and I don't remember exactly who said it, but from a few years ago, someone made a reference that resonated so much to me. And he goes, you see, in Africa, when we speak Africa, the things that we celebrate about Africa, we're talking about Black Africa. We're not talking about North Africa. We're not talking about all these other things. It is Black Africa. You see, I have more in common with my brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, in Bahia, in Cuba, than I do with Africans in Morocco, in Libya, Tunisia, or Egypt. So the Black African, or the African identity for me, is also an opportunity for me to also reclaim my understanding of self versus this thing that has been imposed on us from the outside about, oh, this is what Africa is. And we are towing those conversations or those narratives. And so it brings me to a project I'm actually working on currently. And so in the research leading up to this particular project, last weekend was privileged to go receive an award from the Nigerian American Professional Association, for certain deeds, And I get there, I'm blown away, in a very beautiful way that there is a building that is actually owned by a Nigerian where this hall, this hall where this ceremony is taking place. But then, what used to be a sense of identity until I went on this journey that I'm on today, I saw that name. And for the first time, I came, I questioned what I used to think was identity, or what championed my identity. And it's a slogan familiar in Nigeria called Wazobia. Wazobia, all of a sudden, I was faced with the full meaning of what that really is. And it's a vestige from colonial trivialization of our complexity, of our diversity, distilled into a format that was easy for them to administer and to, So basically, it's the idea that if you run across Nigeria and ask people to tell you about Nigeria, one of the first things I'm going to impress upon you is that Nigeria is made up of three major tribes, Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo. And that becomes the clarity, our identity, actually, that is accepted throughout this country, right? And so I'm doing this project, and this ties back to what I had said earlier about this little project I'm doing, where I now find out that we have 503 languages spoken every day in Nigeria, with an additional 15 languages that have gone extinct in the last 2 decades. And so I had to ask myself, what if I was a person from the Efik tribe, from Ibibio, from Ijo, from Ogoni, from Tiv, from Edo? It goes on and on and on. Am I not part of this Nigeria that screams Wazobia as their calling crawl to say, oh, we are united? I'm invisible in my own country. What is my identity? And so, you see, the subject of identity for me is a complex, is nuanced, and hasn't even begun, hasn't even started. Because it takes a certain level of education and awareness for us to easily say the word African identity. Because we are more complex than we can believe. Even within communities that speak the same language, but different dialects. And so identity is this moving train, it's this moving, it's constantly on the move. And it's a beautiful thing that we are not harnessing for all that it has to give us. But I'll leave it at this.
Thank you for that insightful conversation, Obiora. So, Dr. Julian, you've been in Nigeria. You spent, I think, about 6 months in Southeast Nigeria, and you have, talking with you, you have embraced the culture, and you have done a lot of work, especially in trying to promote the African identity. So, if you can chip into the conversation, what does African identity means to you, especially within the context of Southeast Nigeria, and how has that impacted on your work after spending your time at the Niger Azikiwe University?
Thank you very much. For me, African identity it's knowing, it's being, it's doing. So I was born in Guyana, South America. But I've lived in the US for almost 40 years, so 35 years. And for me, when I think of African identity, I think about where my people are from. That's number one. I may not be able to point to a specific country and say, this is where I'm from, but I know that this continent is my home. And I was raised in such a way that I was, African things in the community I was raised in, they were celebrated, right? So knowing that I'm connected to this place is one thing. But specifically to Igbo land, for the longest while, I've had this strange, I don't know if it's strange, but this passion, this connection. And so when I say knowing I'm from this continent, being African means interacting, learning, doing African things. And so there's not one thing that is Africa because it's so diverse, it's so powerful, it's so colorful, it's so deep. And so, but learning Igbo language then made this concept of Africa even more alive for me. So in 2006, I started learning the language. But my research on the African Guyanese Kwekwe looks more into the role of marriage or the traditional marriage in community. So there were all of these tentacles looking at Africa through film, and then going to Nigeria and living in Anambra State for 9 months. It allowed me to come alive and to make those connections. So when I think of Africa, I think of those connections, those commonalities that bind me to other people of African descent, and speaking mostly of sub-Saharan Africa, right? So when I think of African, my African identity, I don't just think of melanin rich people, but I think of people who do things, certain things, who speak certain languages, right? And so for me, it's being Africa, or my African identity, also um, encompasses the embrace of African things. I've never felt the need to pretend to be to pretend to be anyone else, or to pretend to belong to another ethnic group, because I love the colorfulness, the bigness, the brilliance of this African identity. So it is a multifaceted identity, but I see my African identity as knowing who I am, and that takes effort. It takes learning, because I'm a descendant of enslaved peoples. So I don't have a specific language I can point to, but now I learn Igbo, and I will learn Yoruba, and I will learn other languages. But again, knowing who I am means taking the time to immerse myself in learning about the continent, and being involved doing those things that that will help me to learn, and immersing in whether it's the food or the culture or the other aspects of the culture. So when I think of the African identity, I think of knowing where I'm from, doing the things that are African, and celebrating the richness of this culture.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gillian. It's about knowing, being, doing, and celebrating the African culture. And so far, we've heard language. Yvonne has talked about language. Dr. Gillian mentioned language. And that will take me to this question. How do different African languages carry unique cultural concepts, that might be lost in translation? And how can we preserve these nuances? I know that Yvonne, you are an expert in Igbo language and other African languages, and Dr. Gillian as well. So if you can, I don't know who will go first. Okay, Dr. Gillian, so if you can, let us know how African languages can, how we make sure it does not get lost in translation, and the best way to preserve them. And after that, Yvonne, then Obiora.
As I've said before in other settings, and I also tell my students that language is pregnant with culture. The language we speak, and this is why when a language dies, aspects of that culture will die. And so when I think of African languages, I think of so many ways that it causes us to think about things differently. And I often use the example of a headache. We would say if we have a pain in our heads, we would say, I have a headache, as if we own this thing. Whereas if you translate it, I have a headache, or I am hungry, or what it is, you are not, hunger is not a person. It's like as if you're personifying it. But if you translate that into many African language, you will get, my head is hurting me. This thing is doing me. Something is happening to me. Hunger is hungering me in Igbo language, right? So when I think about learning African languages, I think that it's important because um, like learning any other second or third language, it causes us to think about things differently. It expands our way of thinking. But specifically with African languages, and for me with learning Igbo language, it made English make sense. It made a lot of things we said in English, or we say in English, make sense, because the syntax was so different, the constructions were so different, the source was so different. And so I think that it's important. It's important for us to not just learn these languages, but to preserve African languages. And one of the ways we can do that is by telling the stories, writing, putting the language into the alphabet, and other things that we do on a daily basis, translating or academic texts, especially in science and technology and stuff like that, translating those into the African languages normalizing African languages, right? And I think that doing so will not just preserve the language, but it will impact our self-image when we give value and we give respect to African languages. Our children will value themselves. They'll respect themselves because this, my language, is important. And so that's why I think that it's important for us to continue not just to speak, but to write and to teach, right? So, and to preserve.
When I remember in college, I mean secondary school back in Nigeria, we used to be punished for speaking the Igbo language. So, I mean, we were expected to speak English in school, and if you ever caught speaking Igbo language,
Or
you'll be severely
vernacular.
punished. Or okay, I think we'll call it vernacular. So stop, you can hear the teacher saying, or the class prefect, stop speaking vernacular. I'm writing down the names of those speaking vernacular. So you can imagine growing up, not being proud of your language. So if you've done a lot of work in preserving, if there's someone I know that have been consistent, that has worked so hard and that has, like done a lot of cooperation and collaboration and partnership in preserving the Igbo language, it's you. So in what ways, I know you've done a lot, you're already doing it, but how do we continue to preach this gospel that we need to preserve languages, not just Igbo languages, which of course they say that it's going extinct. You are the expert, you can let us know if Igbo language is going extinct, but African language in general, how do we preserve it?
First of all, the decline started with colonialism, where we were meant to feel that our languages, our individual languages, were inferior. So, and that kind of brought about the situation you mentioned in schools where children get punished for speaking their language. And that was the beginning of the end, if I might use that term, of languages of colonized people. In 2017, I gave a TED Global talk about African languages and their decline. And in my research for that talk, I found out that it wasn't just African languages. It was also places like India and the Philippines and, so many other different places of people that were colonized. Now, because of the pressure to only speak English, and as you're learning English, you're reading, you're utilizing media like songs and books and films. So now, on the other hand, it made us start suffering with our own cultures, because we didn't have enough media, we didn't have enough books, and we weren't given that space to grow our own languages. And so when you find books written in certain languages, African languages, you find that sometimes the translation doesn't mean what it should mean. So the sense is lost. And that's where language death begins to happen. And because of that, I worked in a project a few years ago about an anthropologist that came to Igbo land around 1904, Northcott Thomas. And my job was to transcribe the audio he was able to collect as at 1904 to 1911. And is a rich trove of content. But the problem with the English translation was a lot of the translation given by his field men. When I say field men, I mean men that he worked with who were telling him, oh, this is what this means in English.
Informants.
The informants, yeah, that's the word, informants, was that they literally mangled the meanings. And so I felt a sense of rage when I would read the Igbo version, listen to the audio, and then read the English, and it wasn't matching up. And it got me thinking. Unfortunately, Northcote Thomas, he was sent to southern Nigeria to collect material that would help, the British government make money. But because he got interested in the culture and the worldview, he now inadvertently collected things that were quote unquote useless to the government. But now that's the only material that's helping us have a window into the culture at that time. And so listening to the often distorted audio of that he collected, I was able to even learn more about my own culture, which unfortunately I have to, rely on Western collections to be able to learn about where I come from. And it's also interesting to note that over 90% of artwork and materials created in the 18th century, before the 19th century, are all in museums and collections. So that also serves as a restriction, to help us create material, to help pull, the language up. Now, my language is not static. It changes, it evolves. But at the same time, we need to go back, like they say, Sankofa in the Ghanaian, that you have to go back to retrieve what you have in order to go forward. And unfortunately, not many people have access to those things. Obi, we were talking about it an hour ago, about how many people who want to work in a language, who want to create things, are not even able to have access to things to help them go forward. So, and all this is, killing the zeal. In 5 years ago, I went to a UN event in Paris, and all the countries around the world had representatives from the different countries to come up and speak about it. And there was no one from Africa, only, I think, Tunisia. Nobody from, I hate using that word, sub-Saharan Africa. I just say Southern Africa, like, you know what I mean. And I was so angry. I was telling people, why aren't there any, representatives out of the 53 or 54 countries in Africa? And they said, well, we just put the word out, and the governments, the interested governments sent their own people. So what part of the restriction, which is also, stamping these languages down, and like the language that are getting extinct, is also government policies. The people who own the media, if they're not interested in something, they can't, they won't fund it. So I don't know if I've gone off track, but these are some struggles that people have had. And a few people I know that are content creators, we're all working in our own little silos with no money, no help, basically. For example, a few years ago when I wrote a dictionary, I was told, oh, don't even bother don't bother publishing it until you send it to University of Nigeria and Nsukka and it's approved, then you can publish it. And I ignored them. And I still published it. And I mean, I don't know how many people have found it useful, but excuse me, a lot of people have found it useful. And so and they say, until we own our own media, we can't do much about it. So recently we talked about, on the news about Things Fall Apart being made into a movie, and people are shouting, oh, it should be an Igbo person who, should act on the main character, which it doesn't always work that way. At the end of the day, as I said, pulling from an Igbo proverb, onye ji igu ka ewu na-eso, the person, loosely translated, it means the person with the palm front is the person that the goat will follow. So basically, the person with the funds, the person with the money dictates what they want the thing to be. So until we have all the support in place, unfortunately, languages will continue dying. The few media that's created with that language, the sense will continue being lost. So that's, I think I better stop here to see if other people.
Yeah, Yvonne, I mean, you know, what you talked about, us not even owning any of our artifacts, our contents. I remember when I was making Afia Attack, the role of women in Biafra War, I think you were part of it. And, you know, the struggle we went through finding archival footage to even show in the documentary. And also remember contacting one of the top 3 media houses in the world. And they actually opened their library to me. And they said that every second of the clip that I want to use will cost me $1,000.
Yeah.
I lost it. I mean, I went to NTA, went to all the Nigerian media houses, African media, we couldn't get anything. But this media house somewhere in the United States and in the UK said, for you to use this, which is our content, taken from our land, I need to pay $1,000 per second. So, but anyway, let's pack it somewhere. So to you, Obiora, I mean, let's get into storytelling, because when we talk about African languages, it shows in everything that creatives do, either we are telling stories or through any creative work, be it the art form or writing or literature. So what role do you think educational institutions or cultural institutions can play in preserving and promoting, you know, traditional African storytelling methods in whatever format?
Thanks for that question. First, for me, is acknowledging where we are today versus where we came from. A lot of time, resources, and efforts doesn't prioritize, you know, being able to have a sense of self, you know, whether we've done very well or whether we've done poorly, just to have a gauge of what the reality is. I say this to say that the going narrative is literate cultures are far superior when it comes to language. It is true from the perspective of the person saying that. But it's also true from my perspective when I also stand in defense of oral cultures. But in totality, knowing what we know today, you know, we've all become a hybrid culture, for lack of better words, you know, just because, you know, we straddle both sides of, you know, of the way the world dialogues and communicates, you know, that's made us very hybrid in the way we go about. Now, so for me, going back, looking at oral cultures, which is what we come from, it's a far more richer platform for the ideas that are so dear to us, which is storytelling. We're able to capture stories in 3 dimensions in orality. In literate culture, it's 2-dimensional. And 2-dimensional becomes the record. It becomes permanent. And that is so un-African. And so for me, you know, you know, when we talk about trying to maintain, you know, trying to rescue and trying to, you know, to make our languages thrive, we need to also take a position. And that position has to come from the African perspective and not seeing language through the lenses of the West. Because to do that, you you are already sabotaged from the beginning. There's an inferiority complex. There are different complexes that are attached to seeing language from that perspective. Without going into a lot of details of examples, but let's just say I'm telling a child a story. And it's a story where I'm using characters, and animals and things like that. And you take a particular animal, maybe a bird. There's a way the bird sings, and you try to imitate that tonality of the sound. And the bird is dancing, and you're doing all these movements and all whatnot. Well, in a literate culture, if someone records that, you're going to record probably 60% of the story. And that 60% becomes the record, like I said earlier. But in an oral culture, you're able to create all these intonations and all these things that gives it this vibrancy and richness. The difference is because we don't control the global narrative of storytelling, our format isn't the one that has the currency. Even though we all know it's a better format, it doesn't have that currency. What's also fascinating for me about language is there are certain things that have actually happened, in modern times that actually tell a very fascinating story about how the African and understand, could you, sorry, please, the African and the way language is used by us is so different from the way language is used by every other person, by other cultures. Somebody's coming home from school. Okay. So for instance, I'll use the United States as an example. It's a country of immigrants. So whether you come from Germany, you come from Sweden, you come from Nigeria, you come from Korea, Japan, whatever. Language is the one thing that ties everybody in the US. It's a singular thing, and everybody has to do this one thing where you all learn to speak English. Yes? But this is where the difference begins. Only the Africans are capable of easily moving language forward. And they do it so effortlessly that we don't even understand, credit is not given to them. For the African Americans, they created what we call Ebonics that has now filtered into the language of entertainment and, music and all whatnot, and has become a global force. Now, if you think it was an anomaly, you go to the islands, you have patois, you have Creole. You come to West Africa, you have Pidgin. The Francophone countries have theirs, and I'm forgetting to know what it's called, but the same is done in such places. Why do I say this stuff? Is for two reasons. If this was an easy thing to do, the Germans in America would have done that. The Swedes in America would have done that. The Koreans in America would have done that. In fact, all these different immigrant communities would have done that if it was easy. But there's something interesting again about language, is that when French folks come to Canada, so Canada, we know, is split between Anglophone and a French side to it. The French side of Canada is devoid of enough, of blackness in a quantity that could actually, change language. So French Canada has remained pretty much unchanged since the early French came out that way. That when people from France today, from Paris, come into Montreal, they're shocked at how old the French that is spoken there is. And it simply boils down to, the fact that there isn't enough Black to move the language forward, unlike it is in France. So I give these examples, to say to us that, understanding sometimes what your capability is so key to some of the things that we try to do. Because we know the things that we need to do, but it actually can be given agency simply because you actually know what it is that you are and how powerful and how different that is, that you could actually milk its advantage and put it out in the public stage. And so again, that's my approach to, that's why, for me, to even begin to get into all the amazing things that language is a completely different story. But, foundationally, understanding some of those things is just so mind-blowing.
Thank you, Obi. So I'm someone that is really very fascinated about storytelling. And I would like to ask Gillian, how can storytelling in films or literature and digital platforms reshape and redefine perceptions of African culture on a global scale?
Storytelling can show the innovativeness, the bigness, the fluidity, the liveliness of Africa. Because one of the features of African culture, we have a literate culture, but one of the features that makes African culture or African cultures plural alive is the fluidity, the improvisatory nature of our orality. No story is told the same way each time it's told. It allows for development of character. It allows for improvisation in a way that can take the story into so many different realms, so many different angles. And so I think that one of the things that we can do, right, is allow for spaces for story to be told. Allow for spaces for for stories to be developed, right? And so, of course, we have film. Of course, we have writing. Like storytelling and writing stories. But we need to allow for spaces where we get together, and as the old people in Guyana would say, we ganga, right? We sit and we talk, right? And I was also telling you a while back about how we would sit around at night when it's a moonlight night, and the old people would tell stories, and we want to hear. It's the same story they've told 3, 4, 5 times, but we know that something else will be there. It'll be sweeter this time. They will add something, and we're coming to hear what will be new, what they will improvise, what they will come up with on the spot. Storytellers are good liars, I always say, because they can make up things and they can make it sweet. And I think that as we, Obiora mentioned writing being a two-dimensional way of telling, but with each form we gain something, which each form of storytelling, and with each form we lose something. When we write it down, it's flat. We might say, it's dead, but it will live on because it's written down. So that's just one aspect. The orality keeps it alive, but there must be storytellers in order for it to remain alive, in order for it to keep living. So what we do is that we create those spaces where we're telling stories and we're teaching others, especially the young, how to tell stories. I remember when my children and my family and I would drive to church. And just to get my sons to just stop fighting and making noise, I would make up stories about my life, but I would improvise and I would add. And then I would get tired and they would say, keep telling the story. My husband too would jump in. I'm like, the story wasn't for you. But I realized that a lot of our young people, and on account of how we live, right? We get married, we move away, whatever it is, we don't have the often those the family structure and the community structure that we had, especially those of us who migrated. but we can make time to tell stories. Now we have Zoom. Let's do those same things on Zoom. Let's find time to come together and create new spaces for telling stories. We have platforms like YouTube and stuff like that, where we can tell those stories. And how about if we tell one story this week? We'll tell it this way. We have our YouTube channels or whatever it is, and we come back and we tell that same story another way, and we add some more. But there are ways we must. The orality makes it sweet, but the orality is what puts it at risk. But we have to keep telling these stories and teaching the techniques of storytelling. We'll write it down too, because it will live on. Some will only have it through the words, right? But then if we teach them also the techniques, these stories, and this skill of storytelling, this very unique and powerful aspect of our culture will live on.
Fantastic. Like when you were talking about, gathering to tell stories, there's something new we are bringing to the NE Festival this year. I think I shared it with you, Gillian. It's called Tales by Moonlight. Because in as much as I love festivals, but I feel, I genuinely feel that it's a borrowed culture. So, I've been thinking, in what ways do we make this our own? How do we bring in that authenticity to what we're doing? And for me, that is bringing back Egoma as Tales by Moonlight. So this year, we will be curating Egoma, a gathering of people in the community, because festivals are really for communities, and festivals are tailored to locality where it's being done. So this year, we are curating Egoma at the 5th edition of the South Nigeria International Film Festival. So if you're listening, make sure to join us at Center for Memories in Enugu State, Nigeria. So back to Obiora, you are a storyteller that you have done a lot with, say that writing, or in your designs as an architect, or in filmmaking, in every aspect. And there is something fantastic that you've also created in the artwork, and that is the Ikenga. So how have you reimagined either our language, our storytelling, our culture in reimagining Ikenga? And maybe for some viewers that don't know what Ikenga means, so maybe you can tell us what Ikenga stands for and how you have reimagined it for today's world.
Okay, I didn't expect that one. Okay.
Of course, I'll put you on the spot.
Okay, well, thanks a lot again. As was said earlier, orality, it's in constant flux, it's constantly moving. And we are constantly adapting to things. You have the backbone, but then the rest are constantly, as a structure that gives direction and all whatnot. And then while the rest is constantly interacting and moving and changing according to what they meet, which is what makes storytelling in the modern age such a beautiful thing, because we now have access to all kinds of technologies and things that we can reimagine new futures, new realities for our currencies and all whatnot, yeah? Ikenga is one of those powerful symbols out of Black Africa. A symbol that shows the best of what our intellectual prowess really stands for. And it's critical, for me, that being able to describe our symbols from a perspective that goes outside of, the foundations of where it comes from, but to be able to speak to it from a global language that allows it, to fully become what it is. because it's a human, it's for humanity. These, just like we are used to the idea that ideas from Plato, stories from Shakespeare might come from a locality, but it's a human language. Stories in the Bible, stories in the Quran, ideas from Buddhism. So are ideas and symbols from Africa, from Black Africa precisely. Ikenga is a symbol of self-actualization, is a symbol that explains, that articulates, I should even use the word that way, that articulates the idea that a person, given a particular setting, is able to go from nothing to something based on their personal effort and industry. So it's a symbol of, which came out of Igbo land, of adventure and enterprise. That's what it actually symbolizes. And it's something that it's a human characteristic. It's not a gender characteristic. It's a human characteristic. And this is something that was recognized by our ancestors from time. Gender situations, the politics of it, are sticks that the modern human brandishes mostly for very negative end results. Ikenga, funny enough, predates an idea in the American system called, the American dream, which actually was articulated in 1938 by James Truslow, something I can't remember, in his book, Epic America. Ikenga, so if I go back to the American dream, which, if you think about the definition of American dream, so it can only exist in a democratic setting where there's fair competition, and it's all about people being able to engage their destiny, work hard, given fair competition on a democratic setting, you're able to achieve that dream, to become something. Well, when you think about that, equalitarian values, democratic situations wasn't a thing that was practiced in most parts of the world, especially in Europe, where you had centralized systems of monarchies and class systems and all whatnot. Igbo land was a place that eschewed the idea of such ideas of monarchies and kings. In fact, there's an adage, Igbo enwereze, Igbos don't have kings. And so back in the 9th and 10th centuries AD, the society that we had then, as in a place called Nri, had articulated and created this society based on equalitarian values, based on all these principles that today, the world has now finally embraced and is moving in that direction. We're moving away from monarchies, we're moving away, from centralized systems to decentralized organizations and blah, 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 and, whatever. But we still had principles practiced back then that was more holistic in terms of the way, again, I'm going to bring in concepts like capitalism and things like that, where today, yeah, it's been embraced all over the place, but it's been embraced. It's the version of it that is being practiced is actually tearing societies apart than bringing them together. And that essence is something that the African understands so well, but we remain voiceless on the global stage to be able to actually add this other dimension that now, that humanizes the way we see ourselves, our roles as human, as custodians, our self-appointed custodianship of the planet. And so, without going too much details about Ikenga and the essence of it, and why it came out of Igbo culture versus Yoruba and blah 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 and all that stuff, is to say that these powerful symbols and knowledges and the knowledge that we have, without us understanding the importance of these things from our own perspective, it is difficult to do justice or to appreciate how to position ourselves on a global stage. And and this is an example of that. So when we talk, and that's why for me, film or festivals, like you mentioned, this year you're introducing Egwonwa, which I think is so amazing. But think about it for a moment. We come from a place where geography stipulates that we have two seasons, the rainy season and the dry season. You see, one is the season of work, and the other is the season of play. And once work ends at the end of August with harvest, we enter the season of festivities, which is also the season of dry, Okochi is the season of festivities. So festivities for us was not a one-day affair. It was a continuous affair throughout almost 3-4 months of the year, in which all those ideas that become, our traditions, our storytelling, our dances, our arts, all those things, that's when we make a mental switch as a community from work to creating the things that we now hand over. Because the events of work, of the farming that we did, create a work culture. But the traditions, the things that become your identity as an Igbo person or as a Yoruba person, as whatever, is created in this season of, the dry season, the season of festivities and Okochi and all whatnot. And so, for me, again, is being able to step aside from a narrative that isn't fully embracing of these ideologies, and actually recognizing that you had a far more superior understanding of these things, and you should actually engage this from that perspective versus from a Western perspective. Because a Western perspective, it's a 3-day festival, it's a 3-day music festival, wow, and blah blah blah. No, for us it was alive. It was 3 months, 4 months, and the funny thing is, the work you did in the season of work sustained you throughout the season of play. Try doing that today. You work for 6 months and then in the other 6 months you're
in today's economy.
Exactly. And so again, it's that, being able to step out and actually look back to appreciate some of the things that, we've been taught to say, our forefathers are that primitive, they blah, blah, blah. No, that actually it's far from that. Anyway, that's it.
Okay, so 3 more questions and we call it a wrap. So, but just this, it's very important that we talk about technology, because as we know, the world as we know it today has changed. So I want to, and this question goes to Yvonne, and maybe Dr. Julian can chip in. I've seen a lot of work you're doing with creating images with artificial intelligence. And in fact, Yvonne is one person that will tell me, would you guys, have you seen this? There's this new technology, try it out, So she's my go-to person for new tech apps and all of that. So in what way do you see artificial intelligence and, digital technology impacting African storytelling, and how can these tools help to preserve our cultural authenticity so that it doesn't dilute or maybe misrepresent our identities?
I think AI opens up a whole new world. I think what AI will do for storytelling is what the tractor did for farming. I mean, it's the AI as we know it online only started 2 years ago next month. ChatGPT and all, although we've been living with AI for some time. But I feel that with AI, because as we know, stories happen on a minute by minute or second by second basis. I mean, the length of time we've been in this conversation, it's a story in itself. I think that as more and more creatives learn how to use AI, we will now have that power to create the stories, the media, and be able to dip into, old stories. And when I mean old stories, I don't just mean stories, I also mean works of art, like proverbs and language. And then we can now use that and reimagine it into new things and new understandings. So, for example, what I've been working on is to get, I mean, one of my famous gripes is, all this, organizations that have collected all the images, and you can't even, like Ujuaku, you know how it is when you're trying to do your movie, you can't even afford to pay for the licensing to use something. So with AI, you can reimagine the thing again and create something, but we all need a base to work from. And that's where, all these things come in. For example, I mean, you see some Nollywood movies, they're using what they term as pre-colonial storytelling. And you're seeing maybe a chieftain wearing tiger skin, but tigers don't exist in Africa. So I believe that when you pair, authentic research with all these tools, we can now create, kind of real storytelling that can lead people forward, help people, come into their own identity. Because if you give people what they want, then that thing grows. So I believe with AI, there's so much that can be done. I tried Notebook LM a few days ago, which turns like text into kind of
That's another powerful one.
a podcast and a discussion. But I mean, the usual gripe is they can't pronounce African words. Yeah. It's so Western. I mean, it's so programmed to benefit the Western side, but not other sides. Yeah. So even though I tried using it and I've tried to, mix up the letters to see if we can help them. Like I tried making them say agu, and I had to put the text as AAGOO, agu, just to see if they can get it. So so it's not just the AI being produced, it's also the people creating it. Yeah. For example, if you're creating images with AI, you have to say African American, or I mean, it took me a long time before I was able to prompt an image that could create an Igbo man with the fez cap with the little thing sticking on the top. So, and I mean, it's so, when I say whitewashed, AI can be so whitewashed. Why? Because of the people inputting the material in. So if you don't say, if you run it and say, okay, create, a mother with a child, 9 times out of 10, it will create a Caucasian mother with a child. Unless you now start saying, oh, I want, I want this, I want that. So to wrap up, I just think AI is the wild, wild west now. But again, you see some, I mean, obviously some ethical considerations, people saying, well, they're stealing our stuff. Yes, but an AI, a film producer who knows how to use AI will do better than a film producer that doesn't know how to use AI. And so is that for an author and any other thing. But then again, it's again how it's used.
Thank you,
So
Yvonne.
to finish, I just wanted to say that the future is bright. I don't know what advert says that, but the future is, I think the future is orange or something like that. But I have seen a lot of improvement in trying to reimagine old photographs. Like I've tried to recreate some of Dr. Thomas's images. And it's amazing how much, how much I was able to do. So you can reasonably pass for an old Igbo photograph. So there's still a lot to do, but AI is just, the way forward for me.
I hear you. And, like in this era of machine learning, there is something that's really disturbing that I preach to anyone that cares to listen. Right? Let me use Nollywood as an example. The kind of, when we talk about authenticity, when we talk about pushing out contents that are at least true to who we are as a people. So you see a lot of misrepresentation in the media, and you see that it's what you put in that you get. So if you put in a misrepresentation of people's culture, that is what AI will give you. So I think it's about time African storytellers, in whatever form they use, begin to pay attention to the kind of content they produce. Because sometimes we get so carried away with, making money and getting into the next trending topic, and we forget that we have a future to build. We have an identity, we have a culture to protect, to preserve. So we have stories that represent us as a people in the right way to tell. So with that, I want to see creatives come together like what you're doing. I followed your work with AI. We're trying to at least create images, no matter how difficult that is, to at least make it represent a culture, whether it's Igbo culture, whether it's South African or whatever culture, but you put in effort. We have a lot of content creators that don't put in that effort. I've seen Obiora put in effort in his work. I've seen Gillian put in effort in her work. So I think it's about time we begin to preach this message to every content creator that we know that is around us, that is in our community, and even teach them, collaborate, partner with them to make sure that whatever they're putting out there represents Africa in the right context. So back to
can I also add something? I actually made a post about this 2 weeks ago about audiobooks. In this instance, I was talking about audiobooks with African literature. And in the article, I was writing about how I needed to give a talk about a book, but wanted to, refresh my memory. So, and I said I didn't have time to read the book again, and decided to buy the audiobook. Switched it on, and I could not listen past the introduction because the person that read the story mangled the Igbo names in the book. And I couldn't continue. And I'm like, this is 2024. Does it mean that this huge publishing house could not get, a voiceover talent from Igbo land? And they had to get somebody from, I don't know where she was from, either it sounded like a South African accent. Why would you get a South African person, for example, to voice an Igbo literature book? And so that laziness of, we've sent a man to the moon. We have cars that drive themselves, but we're not able to, and we're in a global world where you can easily go on social media and find anything you want. So it's also for us to make noise about these things, because there are, you know, the decision makers in these media houses. Again, it boils down to us not having our own media. So if I were to write, of course I'm not, because, and that's why I decided to just go self-publishing. Because if you're an author and you sell the rights to any publishing house, you have no say. One of my friends who's an author, you know her, you know, Chika Onigwe. Chika said, I complained about her own book and the audio. I said she has no power. Once she hands over, you know, that's it.
That's done.
So if, again, like I said, if we have our own media, we're able to, you know, kind of create authentic media as much as possible. End of my rant.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's not a rant, I mean. Obiora, I see you like, I mean, there's something you want to say.
I mean, I don't want to jump in front of our esteemed professor, but no, the thing is, we also have to take responsibility. Our institutions have all been dismantled. You see, whose job otherwise would have been protector of these things, you know, they're able to play a neutral position, you know, where it's apolitical, you know, and things are done that are parallel to whatever is going on in society. You know, when you don't have those institutions, you know, then they're not able to do our bidding for us. You know, so we don't have representation. So for instance, when you talk about, say, a global company like Random House would not invest in a place where the people themselves are not interested, you see? And so me, you, her can be interested. We're not the majority, we're not in the majority to influence anything, you see? And so for me, it again goes back down to the brokenness at the foundational level, you know? And so without it, you know, I'll give you a very good example of in the diaspora, for instance. The diaspora presents us, you know, African, you know, current century African immigrants. Let's just, and I want to be very specific, where you came out to the diaspora of your own accord, you know, to go to school, to do this, blah, 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 blah. So you've got this communities that would exist, be it in Chicago, in New York, you know, Houston, London, or whatnot. And they would have associations probably based on, you know, the villages you come from or the states you come from. But there aren't any overarching organizations that actually bind people together. But when it does, most of what we come together for are social clubs based on nostalgia. That's it. So you don't come together to say, oh, this is where we are today as Igbo people in London or Igbo people in the US. This is where we want to be in 5 years' time. How many are we in this community? You know, are we really 50,000 and in our minds we think we're 100,000? Or are we actually 100,000, but in reality, in our mind we're 100,000, but in reality we're actually 1 million? What exactly are you? You know, and so we live in a time of data. So everything you're talking about, you know, large language models, it's all about data. And so if you've got this data that says to you, you know, in Chicago, and like I said, I'm just going to give an example of our inability to use the powers that are in front of us. And then we end up, it's easy for us to blame this way or blame that way. But let's say in Chicago, and I'm just being fictitious, you know, like let's say there are 50,000 Igbo people. or 50,000 Nigerians. Let's just speak Nigerians. Let's just, Nigerians between the ages of 21 and 50. And you're able to collate these people, you know them, you've gotten their data, you've got their contact numbers, their information, all that stuff. And you go, okay, this is where we, say, a group of people come together and they kind of write out perspectives on where we want to go. And you table this in front of people and say, well, I want to be able to collect, every year, $50 from all 50,000 people between ages 21 and 50. That is what, 50 times, that's $2.5 million, right? What can you do with that? Well, first of all, you're able to now go rent a building that brings community together. You're able to start to do things that give you influence, things that, bring up your narrative, things that rewrite conceptions that are misconstrued about yourself. You're able to start to take a position. You're able to start to have a sense of influence on things because you're doing it from a communal perspective versus an individual position. You can still have your parties at the end of the year and your little get-togethers and all whatnot, but you're now able to affect your position in an effective manner that not only enriches the host community, but also allows the host community to have a sense of respect for you. You're able to, so these are things that the diaspora does not do at all. But then we can now say, oh, but these people, how dare them not understand what we know? They can do that, but it's not of interest to them. But it is of interest to you. So you have to now, and so for me, I say this to say, every year, we're being given access to tools that we never had before. We're being given access to incredible amount of technology and knowledge. It's also a very dangerous point in our lives because without institutions that could actually be, have a checks and balances, people could also use those tools to very devastating effects against ourselves. And so being able to be aware, for me is everything. And then you're able to now come together. Yeah, you can do, do what, there's a classic example of, there's this woman, Leni Riefenstahl. She's German. She's dead now, but she, in the Jewish community, would look at her as Hitler's photographer. And so they disavowed a lot of amazing things that she did, but of course, in time, she's been vindicated and all whatnot. But it was because she was the best photographer of her time at that time, in World War II. She wasn't doing things because she was, she had nothing to do with the politics. It's just like, your Tinubu now selecting you because you've got a brilliant mind to represent Nigeria somewhere. And then in the future, maybe Tinubu's government was the worst government that Nigeria ever faced. And then now you become a victim of that because of your genius. I bring this up just to say that, the technology aside, if you don't have checks and balances and, understanding the need for such things to even exist, all that we're talking is just, it's just hot sauce. That's all we keep doing, And so for me, it's beautiful to talk about the possibilities, but it's also important to acknowledge where we are handicapped to achieve those amazing things that we'll see ourselves achieving, so.
That's a brilliant one, Obera. Thank you. So let's round up. If you leave me here, I'm sure I'll keep you till next 2 hours. There's so much to talk about. So, Julian, I think the last question for you is, what is your vision for the future of African storytelling, culture, arts on the world stage?
My vision is very elaborate, to say the least.
We want to hear that.
I look forward to the day when the first things we see is African. The last thing we see is African. When meaning when when their eyes are open, when they learn to read, when they learn when they um when they go to school, when they turn on the television. I told you about my dream to see, just like we can look at Dora the Explorer and we can look at cartoons and Paw Patrol and all of that. My vision is that I will turn on the television and I will see those faces, those cultures, those languages. We can learn Spanish, we can learn English, we can learn Igbo, we can learn Yoruba, we can learn every other Do you understand? So this is what I see. I see a world where African is normalized, where we move away from the colonial mindset, and where we understand why those things were done and it was not to benefit us, and where we're deliberate. We're deliberate about the way we live in such a way that our African cultures and everything, they're normalized, not just with us, but with our children, where we can feel comfortable enough that, hey, if I close my eyes today or tomorrow, I don't worry that they'll get lost, that they'll pretend to be something they're not, that they will be grabbing at straws to try to figure out who am I. So I know that through our stories, we will pass on our values, right? Through our storytelling, we'll pass on our values. And AI is going nowhere. So my vision is that one day we get in front of AI. Not we don't get with it, we get in front of it. Because in order for them to pronounce our African names and African languages correctly, they must have the knowledge. We will give it to them. Just the same way the facial recognition software often misrecognize our faces because they don't know how to. They didn't worry to input it. That's okay. You don't have to do it. We'll do it for you. Just like the AI is taking a lot of in academia, they're taking our articles and stuff like that. A lot of these publishing houses are giving them access so they can train AI. That's okay. We'll give you what you need. And we will not just give it to you, but we'll create the spaces where we will tell you how it's done. And so my vision for storytelling, my vision for African culture is that it will be everywhere. It will be normalized. And because we will be deliberate about doing so, it'll be our way of teaching our culture. It'll be a way of um, implanting and inserting our values, right, into future generations, not just our children, but the other people's children. They can learn from our culture, right? And so this is what I think about. And we'll see when that happens, when that normalizing of Africa happens, that normalizing of African, what we'll see is there's a normalizing of excellence. I'm not an anomaly because I'm an engineer or I'm not an anomaly. I am the norm. I am the standard. And so, in order for that to become um, a, a reality, we have to normalize the way we teach. We have to normalize African things. And so, that's my big vision. I will see it everywhere. We will talk about it just the way we talk about Plato and with the way we talk about um, um, Piaget and all of these people. We will talk about it. And that's because we will be deliberate about doing it. I expect certain things from my children because you know what? Why? I taught them those things. I put in the time. So when they want to act anyhow, I remind them. I remind them. So we have to do the work. So my vision is big, it's bright, and I don't believe in just complaining about what is not right. My whole life has been find a solution. What can I do to help in this venture? And so that's what I think about African storytelling. It's the way forward. We'll tell our own stories because we'll tell it right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gillian, for that powerful narrative, powerful insight that you just shared with us, because it's not just about us, it's also about the future generation. It's about being consistent, about being intentional in pushing out our narratives, because that is what will make people look our way. I really love that. So for Yvonne, the last question would be, how do you hope African identity will be understood and appreciated in the next decade?
First of all, I think that we should do what we can to teach the rest of the world to unlearn that idea of Africa being a country. I think that's a start.
As a starter.
Yeah, so that I will not meet somebody on the road and they will say, oh, where are you from? And I say Nigeria, and they're like, oh, I met someone from Kenya. Do you know them? You know, so that is to teach, the rest of the world, because if you don't tell them, they will not go out of their way to know. And also to create stories. We all have mobile phones, and that's a powerful tool that we can use. It doesn't have to be a Hollywood production. We can just tell our stories and push out there that we don't see lions when we're walking the streets of Nairobi, or tigers, or, or snakes when you go into a shop. So, because no matter how much access we have to information on the internet, Africa is still being seen as a black continent, as in nothing coming out of there, and nothing coming out of there that is good. So at the end of the day, we need to, blow our own trumpet. I think and all it does is it just takes a few people, a few 1%, for the trend to catch on, because people like following trends. So I think the few 1% that is there, the more we make noise, the more someone somewhere will begin to, take notice. So I envision the next decade of being the next 10 years of noise making, but good noise making.
Intentional one.
Not random noise making. It has to be intentional noise making for the few who have access to the tools to teach and teach well.
Thank you, Yvonne. And to you, the gentleman in the house. So what is your vision for the future of African culture, storytelling on the world stage?
I second all the opinions that have been just said. I think for me, in all my travels around the globe, and I've been very fortunate to have pretty much gone to all four corners of this beautiful planet. The one thing that had always been that has always, I found so fascinating is, and this, I have to also say, pre-social media, was my essence always, oh, did we lose? Are we still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
We're
okay.
here.
Oh, okay. So my essence, always preceded me everywhere I went to. In other words, people knew my story, but they've never met me. And so you begin to realize that your story has always been hijacked by a particular person, a particular group, and told in a way that disadvantaged you. You became voiceless without knowing that you became voiceless. You see, And so for me, this is an incredible opportunity that allows the world to hear from me first. Now, it sounds not much, but take it in the context of everyone that has ever been abroad and lived abroad. There is an image that the West has, or not just the West, the entire globe actually, because you could go to Afghanistan and say you're from Nigeria and they would have, it's consistent what they think about Africa. So I say to people I've come to know living in the States, let's just use that as my ground zero experience. So they all know, people meet me, they know I'm Nigerian. But they also know, when I ask them, what do you think about, tell me what you know about Africa. You begin with wars, or in fact, before you tell them, before you ask the question, they actually impose themselves on you as a sense of, oh, you're from Africa. Oh, yeah. So Obi, so is it safe now to go? Because I would love to go to Africa. You're from Nigeria. Oh yeah. Wasn't there like some war that was going on, And so you've got the hunger thing, you've got the war thing, you've got the desperation, you've got the immigrant boat syndrome, you've got, all these things. Plus the occasional lion and giraffe you have to throw in there, to complete the image. And I go to them, and so at first, it doesn't occur to you. But with time, you start to realize that, wait a minute, they have this image, but they've never met any African that fits that bill. Every African you meet abroad has nothing to do with that particular image. So what is this, almost like a dystopian view of the world, where all the Africans I know are, oh, they're very smart. Oh, they're either this profession or that profession, or they're working hard. They don't build the system of money or this and that and that and that and that. But every time I think about Africa, oh my goodness, can we send 50 cents a week to them? Because, there's some refugee camp or another and this and that and that. And so the future, first, we need to merge those two ideas into one, and then knock out what isn't reality and stick with what's reality. Reality is the African you meet. The unreal part is the African you don't meet. That is the story that is used to subjugate the African. And so it's, when we talk about rescuing ourselves, when we talk about reclaiming our narratives, and we talk about all those things, we have a massive job to do. And it's understanding how huge this job is. It goes beyond entertainment. Matter of fact, it's a fight for your very existence, actually. And no pun intended, actually, when I say this. It's for our very existence. Because as an African, I should have the right as a privilege to say, you know what, I don't want to work today. And I don't have to work. Every other person has that privilege. But we can't afford to say, oh, I don't want to do this. You understand? We can't afford to say that. And that, I think, so these are, some of the things for me when I look into the future. I want to be able to live as my ancestors, my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents lived, when they were able to sit on that, you remember, did you remember the classic African chair, with the back on a steep angle, you sit and, that to me is the image I want to see in the future. being able to sit back and ponder the universe and be at peace and be at one with the very essence of that which we are, as humane people, because that's another thing that's, we today cannot afford that. And I want to be able to afford that in the future.
Mhm.
That's
Wow.
it.
I mean, it's been a powerful, liberating session. It's been mind-blowing. I sit here and I'm wondering, and we didn't even scratch the surface. And something I'm taking out of here is that we have people that really are intentional about putting Africa on the world map, the authentic Africa on the world map. And that reminds me, there is this community that my friend and I are putting together. We are bringing African creatives together for those that are already doing the work or those that want to start telling about Africa in the right way, in the right context, and pushing it out there to the public, just like Yvonne said, having people that make intentional noise in the next decade about Africa, telling our story on the right platform, and not just the right platform, and being able to own those platforms. So for us, we are putting together that community where we will begin to tell our stories. And if we do it right, we will be owning our platforms. And I think that's what I hear every one of us say on this panel. We want to be able to relax like our ancestors did, just like Obiora says, and ponder, look at the universe. And that reminds me, I saw that chair, and we still have one in Oka, Anambra State. My grandfather's, I'm not sure, I think I've shared it with you from my grandfather's chair. And I remember one day that my sister, sorry, I says, oh, we need to throw this chair away. And I'm like, are you okay? Throw which chair?
Even if you don't, even if we don't have access, you can buy a deck chair, anything that goes like that.
So just give me the chair. So what I do is I try to collect some of these old artifacts.
Yes.
So
May I say
for us,
something?
it's please do.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to add, and I think we've had this conversation before, but I just want to add about being deliberate about telling our stories and sharing. So people want to know about us. Obiora kind of referenced that. They want to know of African cultures, African things. And so they're being bombarded in the media with nonsense stereotypes. But they want to know because they have met us, and I'm adding myself into that group. They want to know.
Yes.
And let me tell you something that we often don't think about. They also want to go there.
Yes.
When I lived in, so we have to be deliberate about selling ourselves, showing the diverse aspects of our lives. It's not one-dimensional. So when I lived in Nigeria, I remember because I'm always with the camera, I'm always recording things with my phone, whatever it is. And I remember the driver used to call me Wahala Woman because he's like, everything you must record, everything you must see. And I'm like, no, I need you to drive me through this neighborhood. And I would take videos if I go to the palm wine tapper, if I see this, if I see that, because it's the beauty, it's the richness. And some of those things people are trying to hide. Those are the things they think makes them look backward, and those are the things that other people want to see. And then when I showed them the videos of they're like, oh my God, they can never afford houses like that, right? But the market woman has a nicer house than you. Do you understand? So it's like changing the mindset about ownership, about learning skills, about apprenticeships, about community, about so many things. And so, I'm teaching a class on film, right? And so one of the things I do, I incorporate that. I don't just show them the bigness and the beauty and all of that, but I make those connections. It's like X in our culture. It's like Y, and I normalize it, right? And so I had Gerald Eze come in, and Ujuaku will come into my class, come in as in they Zoom in and talk to the students. Gerald is an Oja player, and I played his documentary on the Oja, and I showed them Afiata, and the first thing they heard was the Oja. So they know what it is now. And he's made sure he ranted and raved. Don't call it a flute, right? But for me to explain to them, I'm like, well, it's an indigenous Igbo flute. But the point I'm making, whatever I'm talking about, whether I'm talking about gender or about marriage or about whatever it is, I show them and I explain to them. And I sometimes don't even have to say it's like X. They could be, oh, so it's like whatever it is. You know what I mean? So I have normalized that. They know they will hear about Igbo culture in some way, shape, or form. And when I was the amount of people that say, when you're going back to Nigeria, I'm coming, especially people of African descent, because there is something that's happening in the Black community, broadly construed. I feel like there is this shaking that's happening, an awareness that's happening, and people are coming together. They're like slow. It's like I see it as like them just slow walking to the center, and they will meet each other. And the bigotries, even the ones that we have towards each other, the negative stereotypes, those things are chipping away because we are seeing each other, we're knowing each other, we're valuing ourselves. And so that's my 2 cents.
Oh, thank
Are
you.
coming
I mean,
home.
like, yeah,
Yes, we are coming home.
like we are
We're
coming
coming
home,
home.
and let me round up with this being intentional, the being deliberate about telling these stories, about storytelling most especially, because I think 2 days ago I was having a conversation with a friend, and I said, if you look at what is going on in the world, a lot of these big artists, production houses are looking the way of Africa, because they know that we have our stories. And I'd say, like, before pre-colonization, with everything that happened, they have seen that, I mean, and I'm trying to see if I should say this or not. I mean, should I or should I not? But what I'm trying to say is that they are looking the way of Africa. And if we don't position ourselves in the right way, if we don't own these platforms, if we don't own these spaces, we will have people that will be used like they used our fathers to tell the African story. And it will be another colonization. And in decades to come, we will start crying again, what do we have to do about Africa? So that's why we need people like you, Yvonne, Obi, Jillian. We need to start making intentional noise. We need to own our spaces. I know what each and every one of you, I know your work. I know what you do. We are not just colleagues, we are friends. So I've seen you put in the work. So we need to occupy these spaces and tell these stories. And while we are doing that, we also need to mentor the younger generation. That's what Jillian is trying to do. We need to mentor the younger generation, because if we don't do it, we'll come back in the next 100 years. Our children will begin to ask questions. What did our fathers did? What did they do? Right? So it's about time we take up these spaces and be deliberate about making intentional noise. So with this, I'm going to be calling all of you again, because we have not, yes, Obi, I'll give you.
There's 2 points I want to
Okay.
amplify, actually.
Okay.
The first point is to say AI, because I've not even said anything about AI, in the sense that the future of AI is storytelling, actually. That is the future, because, with the predictions that, work is being taken away and
so
blah, 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 and all whatnot, what are people going to be doing? So it's about people being able to tell stories of the things that become our lifestyles in the future. And we are disposed so naturally to occupy that space as a people. That's one. The other thing is when we talk about mentorship, when we talk about being able to be deliberate and intentional in telling these stories, there's also something peculiar I have to point out with our generation. We are a generation that might never happen again in the African history, in our history, you know. In other words, with the evolution of man, our parents were at a time that you could say it was non-digital. Our children are fully digital. We are the only generation that is the bridge that stands between, a non-digital time and the times of digital. And that is so peculiar and so incredibly powerful as a privilege, because it is a bridge of storytelling in itself. Because it's a bridge that actually can relate to your left and can relate to your right. Both sides only relate to their very specific experiences. Unfortunately, we're not aware of this as an urgent position to be in. And when we talk about excavating African things and all whatnot, you excavate and then you put memory into it to be able to tell the story, to fill the gaps. The generations in the future are not predisposed to be able to do that. We are. Question is, what are we doing about it? Those are the two things I wanted to add on.
Wow. So I think the question is, what are we doing about it? So as we round up today's panel on exploring African identity through arts, culture, and storytelling, I actually don't want to round this up, but we have to. I wish I would just go and rest, but we have work to do. This is not the time to take a kind of rest Obi talked about. We can't afford to rest now. We have work to do. So exploring African identity through arts, culture, and storytelling, a part of NIF 2024 Storylines series. And I was telling Yvonne Chioma that I think it's about time we start doing this. I think I'm going to be doing this more often because there are lots of conversations
Yes.
to have. And I'll be calling, of course, I can drag you. So I'll be calling on all of you again. And I also see us, we're already collaborating on different things. So I want to see us do more, partner, lift each other up and make sure we amplify our stories out there. For it's all about Africa. It's all about who we are as a people. It's all about, we are doing it for the culture. And at the end of the day, when they say, oh, who is your grandmother? Or who is your grandfather? They say, my grandfather is Obi Mwazota or Draco or Gillian or Yvonne. So I think that's how I would love to be remembered. They put our stories on the world map, and that's what we are doing. And that's what we are going to continue to do until we leave this earth. So with that, we are signing off on Storyline Series. And this is Sue Draco, your moderator. And it's a bye.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you all. Nice meeting you all.
Nice meeting you too.
Same here. Same here.
Same here. So sorry, there's something I've been doing of late in the past 1 year. I don't know. I think it's a new skill that I just discovered, and that is pulling people, connecting people. And I don't think I'm doing badly there. So
No, you're doing well.
think I'm doing well, right? So I think after NIF is done, 4 of us, I wish there is a way we can all be in one location. Even I still say it, we are going to Chicago next year. I don't know. We are going to Chicago. Julian is already there.
If he will be around.
He will
Anytime
be
I come
around.
to
He
the
will give us
US,
a
he's not
time.
in.
Don't mind her. You know, she has mouth. That's why she's talking. Don't mind that. You know?
So we will go. Need to sit down, like 4 of us. We have things that we're doing.
But I mean, we
I've-
can always have a virtual cup of tea together.
Yes, please, we can
On
do
Zoom,
that.
yeah.
So after the festival, I mean, we find out a time when all of us, because I already told Obi about Gillian. Gillian, I've told Yvonne about you, and vice versa. Like, I see a synergy. We have
Yeah.
work to do. So
Oh,
with the
goodness.
work, Gillian,
Exciting work to do,
there's
actually.
there's something that she's putting together, which I shared with Yvonne yesterday. So there's so many ways to collaborate, and I look forward to us doing that.
Yeah.
Now and in the future, but I hope the future is near, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Super.
thank you. If you leave me, I'll continue to talk. So
all good. So good.
Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you.
All right.
All
Thank
right,
you
take
so
care.
much. Yeah.
All right.
Ciao.
Bye.